Welcome to this edition of Valor Media. This is episode number 43 for November 30th, 2020, and I'm your host, Mark Appenzeller. I can't believe that we're nearly into December and that pretty soon the year of 2020 will be winding down. And it's amazing to me that we are all the way into episode 43 of the Valor Media podcast. It seems like it was just a few weeks ago that we were trying to figure out the logistics of getting this podcast started. We had a pretty clear concept of what we wanted to do with it, but it was in a lot of ways a leap of faith, and we really weren't quite sure what direction things would go in. We had a target, something we were reaching for, but sometimes targets can be elusive, and sometimes the things that we're almost positive will happen end up not happening. And if we don't maintain a balanced perspective, we can allow ourselves to get despondent because we feel that we've somehow missed the mark. Now, the number 43 isn't a particularly momentous one. It's not like our 100th episode, but we're far enough and deep enough in that as I was starting to record today, I really felt like I wanted to just reflect a little bit on how we got from there to here and why I think it's important for all of us to do that, to really examine where we are when we're pursuing something. I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of this podcast and just explain why the podcast, I think, became a tremendous success in light of the fact that it embodied an idea that in the past simply never came into being. And the temptation would have been strong to say, oh, well, that was something that didn't work. And yet it worked in a very different way than was originally anticipated. And that's part of what I wanted to share with you today. And I'm titling this episode, The Real Deal. And I'll drop this one into our Valor XL series where we talk about strategies for business and thriving in whatever it is that you do. And I always say, when you use the word business, people bring it down to the world of nickels and dimes. And that certainly can be business. But we all, in our daily lives, apply our energy and efforts to things that we're trying to bring a result out of. And so maybe you can tie this specifically into what you do in whatever company or organization you're a part of. But even if you don't put it specifically in the traditional business sense, maybe this falls in the context of things you're pursuing in your own household, your marriage, or maybe it's just you as an individual with your own goals. You have a target that you're shooting for. You might understand some of the steps between where you are and where you want to be, but you also know it's potentially a long and winding road until you get there. Well, you might not know, but the Valor Media podcast was originally not intended to be a podcast. And the person who came up with the initial idea that launched everything we've done in these 43 episodes is Valor's executive director, Lori Riston, who is your host on many of these episodes. And Lori, several years ago, came up with an idea that wasn't related to the world of podcasts, but it was related to the world of broadcasts, because Lori had the idea, the concept for a radio show that would be derived from the work that's done at the Valor Crisis and Training Center. We spend all of our efforts in a weekly basis trying to assist people who are in crisis situations. The goal isn't just to be able to financially assist people, but it's really to help people to understand how they wound up in a crisis situation to begin with, and to learn ways that they can not only move out of that crisis, but move to a much higher level of living. The goal isn't to simply survive, to grind through week after week, but to truly thrive, to reach for things that might seem unattainable, to find ways to branch out, to push the limitations and the confining parameters aside so that individuals can really find their God-given purpose and develop in the fullness of who they were created to be. Now that's a very complex goal. It has a lot of little sub-goals to it. And at Valor, we try to help people. We try to give them direct guidance. We have many different facets of Valor Ministries, our mentoring program, our personal development coaching program, ways that we can help individuals who really need someone to come alongside them, walk with them, help them find the specific direction they should be going in. But Lori's original idea was for a radio show, and the idea would be that each week there would be a particular topic that was discussed, and then people could actually call in to the radio show. Well, I thought it was a great idea. She wrote an amazing proposal. She showed it to me years ago, and she took some steps to try to get others interested in it, and it never panned out. And I remember when I read it, I thought, wow, this is such an incredible concept, because I felt like it served two really important purposes. The first was it really presented Valor Ministries in a way that could help outsiders to get a much deeper perspective on just how detailed our approach is in trying to help individuals. Because an outsider would look at us and say, that's a faith-based organization. It's a 501c3. They help people with evictions and utility terminations. And that's all true. But if somebody only sees us at that level, they're missing 90% of the picture. And so one of the things that was exciting to me about Lori's concept was I felt like it was a perfect showcase. It was a way for people to really see the totality of what Valor is all about. Now, the other side of the coin is the fact that Lori's format was exciting from the standpoint that individuals could call in during the radio show and ask questions. They could ask for more detail about whatever was being discussed. They could present topics that maybe in the future would be brought up in new installments. And maybe some of those individuals would themselves be people who are in crisis, and that would give them maybe a fresh perspective that, hey, there are people out there who can help point me in the right direction. I think what Lori presented was really novel and unique, and in her proposal, everything was put in a way that was, to me, very real life. It looked very attainable, it looked very doable, and we weren't able to find anybody who would take interest in it and see it through to completion. But that proposal never went away. And from time to time, I would kind of look at it and I just thought, wow, this is really good. We should do something with this. Well, over a period of time, Lori and I had conversations about what we could do, and that's where the idea of the podcast finally came in. Now, neither one of us had ever done a podcast before, and although I had my own recording equipment and had a pretty extensive background with editing recordings, I didn't really know what to do in the world of a podcast. But we kept coming back to what she wanted to present in that radio proposal, and I just felt like that was such a great idea, we couldn't let it fall by the wayside. So it got tweaked a little bit. And as more and more discussion unfolded, the idea of the Valor Media podcast came into being. Now, we could have simply said, you know what, we couldn't get anybody interested in doing the radio show. That could have been something that we looked at as a defeat, as a failure, as a huge setback. But you know what, in the long run, I actually feel like what we were able to do by putting this podcast together maybe ultimately gave us more of a platform than we would have had in the confines of a radio broadcast. We're a very small nonprofit. We're in a small city in Western Maryland, and we don't have in our own geographical region a huge sphere of influence. So we thought, well, if we do a podcast, we might get a couple of local listeners. And I've commented about this in other installments, but this fascinates me to no end. 43 episodes in, and in the course of us making these podcasts and uploading them each week, we have actually attracted listeners from literally all over the world. That blows my mind because in a lot of contexts, I can't even imagine how anybody found us. And I've mentioned this before in previous episodes, but we've had listeners from literally all over the world, from Ireland and Ontario and Belgium and Russia and Africa. And what intrigues me about that is that on some level, the influence of Valor was out there in areas we never would have been able to reach through a local radio broadcast. Now, that's not to say that the local radio broadcast wouldn't have had any value or merit, but it's intriguing to me that by stepping in this different direction, we were able to potentially impact and influence people we would have never in a million years even known how to target. Now, some of those people kind of come and go, but even within the U.S., I'm intrigued. We've had consistent listeners who download and follow this podcast from California, from Texas, from North Carolina. And I'm really, really amazed that that continues to happen. Because again, we were starting off thinking, well, how can we serve those in our area? How can we step out there and make ourselves available for those who are in need here? Little realizing that here could be worldwide. And one of the things we always do in the context of these episodes is we invite our listeners to contact us. It's kind of a different take on that phoning into the radio show, because here we don't have the ability in real time to answer questions or provide feedback, but we want to be able to hear from our listeners just as we would have in the radio format, so that we can tailor what we do and make it valuable, make it relevant, make it applicable for those who listen to us. That's an intriguing concept. And the one other really cool thing we were able to do in the context of the podcast is we've diversified it to where we literally have episodes that fall into two different categories. As I said today, this one I would say belongs to our Valor XL series, because it's kind of targeted along that idea of strategies to help you thrive in business. But the other portion of what we do is the Crisis to Thriving series. It ties directly into a lot of the work we do at the Valor Crisis and Training Center, and it's really geared toward helping people to know how they can have abundant life. We believe Jesus said he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. So we want to help people. We want to be able to transform them through Christ from crisis to thriving. I don't know if we would have ever been able to diversify in that way in the context of a radio broadcast, but this has been great because we literally can decide which category something falls into, and I feel like we have listeners who benefit from both. So I said all of that to say that coming into episode 43, all I can feel is that we ultimately wound up with exactly what God wanted us to go into. It's not what we planned several years back when Lori came up with her radio concept. And again, that might have had its own benefits and blessings. And we could have certainly gotten very defeated when it didn't pan out. But what I think is really cool is that here, in God's own way, in his own timing, he allowed a podcast to happen that on some level has helped us to have global influence. Pretty mind-blowing. So I wanted to share that for you today in the context of what I titled this episode to be, which is The Real Deal. Do you ever feel like there's something you want to pursue, but it just seems overwhelming to you because you start to ask yourself those questions of, well, who am I? Well, I don't have a college degree. Well, I wasn't trained to do that. Well, I'm not a professional. Well, I've never done this before. And we talk more and more and more to ourselves, and we begin to really create a compelling argument for never doing anything. We certainly could have done that when we undertook this podcast, because the reality is we never did a podcast before. Now, we came into it with a rough idea of what we were shooting for, but there was still a lot that we had to navigate around. We had some technical challenges. We had just different logistical things that would pop up from time to time. And in the course of all of the turbulence that's happened in 2020, it was really a challenge sometimes to still make things happen. We had to be conscientious. We had to discipline ourselves. It wasn't always easy to make sure that we would get a weekly podcast episode created, and yet we committed to do it. Now, for us, I really feel like we plugged into what we were supposed to be doing. But we could have talked ourselves out of it for all of those reasons. And I did a little bit of reading this year and discovered that those types of feelings are actually really very common. In fact, they're the norm rather than the exception, and they point to an intriguing social phenomenon that exists now that is called the imposter syndrome. Have you ever heard of that? The idea is basically this feeling that, well, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm not qualified to do this. And this idea that, well, someone is going to find out that I really don't know what I'm doing. Well, guess what? We're all in that boat. I think as social media has made it a lot more easy for folks to connect, as platforms like podcast hosts and YouTube and things like that have enabled all of us to be able to find a way to have a voice and to have influence, it gets very tempting sometimes to think, wow, I can literally tell the world whatever it is I want to say, but am I qualified to say it? And the answer is anyone qualified to say it? Because there may be people who have tremendous skill and have degrees and have whatever important background is that they need, but what it really comes down to is that we need to move forward with what we feel God is calling us to do and just trust Him to show us how to do it. It doesn't mean we'll do everything perfect, and we certainly have not done things perfectly here. There have been mistakes, there have been things that probably could have been done better, but we haven't given in to the imposter syndrome because for us, this is the real deal. We're not trying to be anybody other than us, and I think that's a huge key aspect. Whatever you pursue, don't try to compete with somebody else and don't try to imitate somebody else and don't even try to emulate what someone has done. Whatever it is that you feel drawn and compelled to do, just have a confidence that that's unique to you. And if you trust God, He will empower you, direct you, and show you how to do it. And if you make mistakes along the way, if you have setbacks, that's actually okay. We had setbacks when we pursued trying to do something that we thought was a great idea, only to find out that we got led by the Lord into a completely different idea that wasn't there initially, but maybe in the long run better suited our needs and our purpose. So I'd like to just kind of leave it at that today and just let it be an encouragement to you. Whatever it is that you are trying to pursue, don't consider yourself an imposter if you don't necessarily have it all figured out, because nobody does. Don't feel like it's too overwhelming. It may feel overwhelming, and it may not be easy. It may be a rough, slow start. But perseverance is what wins the race. And sometimes the worst thing you can do is talk yourself out of getting started. If you can just focus enough to put one foot in front of the other and just continue to do it, momentum is kind of a natural byproduct. So whatever that looks like for you as you move into 2021, doesn't have to be a podcast. It can literally be anything. You want to pursue something and you'd like to see positive fruit for your labors. So I'd like to just ask that. Find whatever that thing is. Learn everything that you can to have a solid basis to start on. Because I think that we really do have a much better shot at success when we've gathered all the information that we can. I tend to fall into the overkill camp. I always say there's no such thing as too much information. But you decide what is right for you. Don't worry about learning every little detail because a lot of things you can't learn until you're doing them. And you can read and read and read for 20 years and have tremendous knowledge. And if you have zero experience because you've never tried to do anything, what's the point? So move into 2021 pursuing whatever it is that maybe you have almost talked yourself out of doing. And be willing to understand that it may not go perfectly at first, but if you persevere, you will get there. And you'll discover that you're not an imposter, but you are the real deal. Like I said earlier, we want Valor Media to be a podcast that addresses your needs, provides feedback to you, answers questions. If there's anything that we've discussed in this or any of the previous episodes, or if there are any topics that you think, wow, I'd really like to hear more about that, please reach out to us at media@thevalorcenter.org. And we'll do whatever we can because we want this content to be crafted for you. And we at Valor Ministries also want to be there for you. If you're at a place where you really would like to try to reach out and move forward in your walk with Christ, maybe you don't really understand what that means. Maybe you're at a place right now where you just would like somebody to pray with. Maybe you're facing problems and challenges. You know you don't want to stay where you are, but you have no idea where to go. We can help. You can contact us at info@thevalorcenter.org, and someone from our staff will get back in touch with you and start giving you some guidance and some solutions so that you can move from crisis to thriving. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook at Valor Ministries and Valor XL, and you can visit our websites www.thevalorcenter.org and www.valorxl.com. We do want to continue to bring you content like this week after week. And if this is an encouragement and a blessing to you, would you consider financially supporting Valor Media to keep this content available as we move forward? If so, you can make your generous tax-deductible donation securely online by going to www.thevalorcenter.org/donate, or you can send a check or money order to Valor Ministries, 324 East Antietam Street, Suite 104, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21740. I'd like to thank you again for joining me today. Please come back next week and every week for future installments of Valor Media. And until then, remember this: you were made to thrive.